Hello, ethics class. Today we are going to take a look at pragmatism, which is another potential normative theory for Unit 2. So to start with, let's talk about a workable definition of pragmatism. Know that pragmatism kind of gets its start with a blend of philosophers and psychologists in the late 1800s to like 1920s in the United States. And so think of scientific attitude being applied to morality. But if you want just a basic workable definition, I would say it's this, that pragmatic ethics or pragmatism uses experience and knowledge to determine the right action. And so the value of an action to a pragmatist like rests in its practicality, right? And so remember good old Kant's categorical imperative. While I, really admire and like Kantian ethics, remember that our big problem with that was the fact that there were some definite practical application problems with that. So remember our inquiring murderer scenario. And so the pragmatists kind of want to avoid those kind of big overarching theories that don't have a lot of practical use in everyday life. And so you don't need to write these people down. If you like pragmatism and want to go read some original sources of the movement, here they are. Okay, Hugh La Follette and Charles Peirce, right? Kind of the more modern term people. Peirce looks like Pierce, but it's pronounced Peirce. Coins the term pragmatism, and Hugh La Follette is a contemporary philosopher on the subject, and the rest of the people would be more of historical founders of this movement. And so let's take a look here at some of the main ideas of pragmatism. Okay, so pragmatism is going to be based on habits. Okay. So what are habits, right? Habits are those actions or that set of actions that like you exhibit in your behavior that are kind of influenced by previous interactions with the social environment, right? And so even when we don't even realize it, right? Habits are kind of affecting us. The pragmatists believe that habits can be good or bad. They can empower and they can restrict, right? So we learn from experience. That's a good thing. But we might overlook like better or more significant things because we're kind of stuck in a bad habit. And so they would say, like we want to use habits to empower, not to restrict. Habits are very social. So that's where the whole psychology comes in to this, right? A lot of our habits are kind of transmitted by culture, right? One of La Follette's like famous quotes is like that we live in cities rather than caves, not because we are more clever than our cave dwelling ancestors, but because we had better ancestors than they did. And so talking about how habits kind of help us evolve as moral creatures. And concerning changing your habits, right? Like society affects our habits, which affects our choices. So we can either strengthen or we can alter those habits. And they would talk, the pragmatists talk about like real change requiring hard work. So if you think of any bad habit you have and how hard it is to break that and change it, they're going to say just perseverance is going to get you through. Dewey kind of referred to that is like mental magic, right? That you can't just think or theorize about being a better person. You actually have to do things that change the habits to make you a better person. So they're not going to be a big fan. Like this is how it's different from the virtue theories, right? Because we can't comfort ourselves by saying what we quote, I'm using quotes, you can't see me, but like what we really are. Like I can't say that I'm like health conscious, right? If I'm like going like through a fast food drive-through every day on the way home from school. Like we can't comfort ourselves by saying we're one thing, right? The pragmatists would say your habits essentially are you, right? And so if you don't like those, you have to work hard to change them. Okay. And I think I forgot one more bullet there. Yeah, there it is. Multiple habits good, right? So again, the more moral habits you had in your habit toolbox, so to speak, the pragmatists would say, cool. Okay. Um, Here is their problem with traditional normative theories. All right. The pragmatists are going to say that the traditional normative theories to sit around and theorize without practice, which they say is useless, right? And they related to that, right? They're saying that traditional normative theories are so criterial, like if this, then that, right? Or always look to the outcome, or always look to the action. And they're going to say that, like, that's like these principles are like okay in helping us distinguish good and bad or right from wrong, but like they just give you a measure for determining. um they think that that's really hard to apply on a case by case basis, right? And that you really just have to like practice being of good character in order to be of good character. Okay. And I thought there was one more. Did I miss it? I didn't put it on there. Okay. Well, they just think that some of those more, oh yeah, it is. There it is, hiding at the bottom. It's underneath our slide advancing thing. That the other theories over rationalize human beings, right? Like that we're not just like purely logical creatures, that like you're in some sort of moral dilemma and like you have no emotion and your brain's just solely like, oh, let me weigh the pros and cons and make a utilitarian, decision of this. They're guessing that it's probably more of just practice and getting into the habit of doing moral and right things that make you react to those situations rather than like sitting and weighing the pros and cons as some major moral dilemma is happening. So that's kind of their critique with all the ones we've done so far. Okay, so we have some tenets of pragmatic ethics here. Okay, morality is a habit, right? And so like a little just scenario here to kind of help you understand this. Let's say that we've got like two people, Susan and Robin, and they are walking down the street and this, John trips on the sidewalk, right? So Susan kind of reaches down to help him and Robin just keeps on walking by. And later at work, Susan has to decide how to handle some like dispute between her coworkers. And in an adjoining office, Robin, our person that didn't stop to help, faces some sort of similar like decision. The pragmatists are going to say that Susan is going to be more sensitive to the way her decision affects all of her coworkers because she's in the habit of being concerned for others, whereas Robin is probably going to be more indifferent and maybe make a decision that her coworkers are going to be like, that's stupid. Like, why did she make this decision? So the pragmatists are saying the difference between Susan and Robin, it's not their conscious decision, even though those were different. But the true difference is in what they're habitually disposed to see, right? What they consider relevant, what they think about, what they use to guide their actions. And so again, just having moral theories that we sit and hypothesize about doesn't help. It's getting in the habit of doing moral and right things that's going to, I don't know, make it be easier to make the same right decision in other situations, right? So if you're in the habit of considering others, then you'll tend to be more moral, right, in considering other people's feelings in future scenarios. Okay. As a result, right, morality is very social, right? Like, so morals are kind of our own, but they're really influenced by the people around us, okay? And they're going to be very careful in saying that to be pragmatic, we should not embrace either extreme, right? We don't want to say, oh, so I'm just a product of my social forces. I don't have any say in how I act. That's too far in one extreme. But in the other extreme, they're not going to say that, I'm a completely wholly autonomous person, like the existentialists, free from all social influence. All of that's fake, just be authentic. Pragmatists lie somewhere in the middle of those two extremes. Okay, so how do you change habits for moral reasons? remember Darwin was mentioned on our historical figures slide. And so think about this as like the natural selection of habits, right? That having a variety of moral habits is the key to like moral deliberation and survival, kind of using quotes there. You've got to adapt to survive, right? And so like this moral evolution is that moral habits kind of change when shifts in your environment kind of force you to change. Okay, so like I'm trying to think of an example. Here we go. All right, so let's say that we have a person, right, that was kind of raised, with bigotry in their household, right? That the upbringings, the social norms that they were raised in, like meant that they're not very tolerant of other people, right? But then let's say that that person like goes to like a very diverse college, right? Or gets a job someplace where he or she works with a lot of diverse people, right? Like being around other people, being in a social environment, like could spur personal change, right? Because if this person doesn't change those like moral beliefs, then he or she's not going to survive in that environment. And so like if you look at like the civil rights movement, that was like a lot of acceptance of small changes first that kind of slowly altered people's views in the United States, slowly, as the pragmatists would say, altered that bad habit of bigotry. Okay. And the pragmatists, this is good news for all of you, say that younger people are less entrenched in their habits, so you are more easily able to adapt and survive in new moral situations. So good for you. Okay. And then, the consequentialist, non-consequentialist debate is not a problem for the pragmatists. They're like, hey, let's be pragmatic. Let's look at both, right? So changing a habit isn't just for some goal, right? Like an end doesn't stop an action. It just kind of redirects it to something else. And so the means kind of to a pragmatist constitute the ends. It's not like a mere route to our ends or route to our ends. They're like, they go hand in hand. You can't separate them. And the pragmatists think it's dumb that all these other theorists like kind of separate them into these either or camps. They think that that's not very pragmatic. Okay. And so again, like that's what they hate about the traditional moral theories. Okay, so when all is said and done, let's look at some pros and some cons of the pragmatist theory. Okay, so what's cool about it is that it kind of gives you some general criteria, like look at means and ends, like focus on, think of it as kind of like focus on employing the virtues that the virtue theorists say are good, like put them into habit, put them into use. And so it gives us some criteria without saying like, you have to do this in order to be right. Okay, so it's not criterial, but it gives us some criteria to use, which is cool. It does get insight from other theories, right? It's not necessarily saying that all the other theories are wrong, which is kind of nice. It's saying, hey, there's probably elements of all of those that have truth. Pick the pieces out that you want that are practical to use and make them your habits. Okay. Again, it's relative without being relativistic. So we can kind of all piecemeal together bits and pieces of all the theories that we like. Your habits might be a little bit different than my habits, but it's not relativistic. It's not going to the meta extreme of, well, then there is no such thing as morals because it's up to each person. That's not the extreme that they want to go in. So that's what makes this kind of nice. Again, it tolerates without being irresolute. So, right, you can take the parts of other theories that you like. You don't have to like reject everything you've learned so far in this class to be a pragmatist, which is kind of nice. Okay. And it kind of describes, I don't know, the relationship between theory and practice. They're saying you can't separate the two, right? That it's kind of the justification for the Unit 3 when we get into applied ethics. Like there's no point in learning all these theories unless you put them into use. The pragmatist is saying, yeah, that's what you should value, is putting them into use and developing good habits to be good actions and be a good person. Okay, so this seems great, but I mean, I think the biggest con is it's kind of like all of the other later theories that we've talked about in class. Like, why weren't all of these other theories mentioned in your textbook? And it's probably because I don't know if it's really a normative theory or it's just more descriptive. Like, it's just telling you how people use ethics. So, is it really a theory in and of itself? Or is it just descriptive? It's just telling us how people use ethics, but it's not really a separate theory. Um, I don't know. Or can you say that it's a theory because you believe that the right thing to do is to develop good moral habits that you put into practice because you are your actions, not what you say you are? I don't know. That's I think something I'll leave it up to like each of you to decide. Like, can we say that this is a normative theory in and of itself, or do we think that it's more of just a psychological description as to how people would use stuff that they've learned in an ethics class? IDK, you have to decide that. Okay, so that is pragmatism. Um, Feel free to use the outline that was in Google Classroom. Probably should have said that at the beginning of the presentation, but just doing this on the fly. So let me know what questions or concerns you have. And as always, thanks for listening.